In the last video, we talked about the fees related to sending inventory into Amazon, but there's another category of fees that often show up when something goes wrong, and they are some of the most expensive fees on Amazon. One brand I spoke with had to pay over $50,000 just to remove inventory from Amazon's warehouses after an unexpected compliance issue came up. In this video, we're going to walk through the specific fees that can create situations like that, and how to avoid putting yourself in those situations in the first place. I'll walk through removal fees and disposal fees. I'll explain when these fees apply, how they're calculated, and the situations that typically lead to them. This brand I spoke with was selling a larger product on Amazon. It was a type of kids' table, so the product was relatively big and heavy. They sent a batch of inventory into Amazon, and while it may have been a bit more than ideal for the first launch, the product was actually selling well and things were going smoothly. So from an inventory standpoint, they likely would have been fine. But after a few weeks, Amazon requested additional documentation and some different lab testing that had to be done through a specific type of lab. The brand didn't have that documentation ready, and it took some time to coordinate the new testing. During that time, the listing was blocked and the inventory could no longer be sold. When Amazon has inventory for a listing that's blocked, the inventory is considered stranded, and Amazon will only allow inventory to sit in their warehouses as stranded for a limited amount of time. Amazon's system automatically created a removal order to send all the inventory back. And once that process was triggered, there wasn't a way to stop it. They ended up getting charged around $50,000 just to remove that inventory from Amazon's warehouses. Then after that, they still had to complete the testing, wait for approval, and pay to send the inventory back into Amazon again. The key takeaway here is that while it's relatively cheap to send inventory into Amazon, it's very expensive to have them send it back. You not only need to make sure that you don't send in more inventory than you can sell within a few months, but you also need to be extra conservative, especially when your account or product is new, because unexpected issues like this can come up a lot at that stage. So what actually are removal fees, and why do they end up being so expensive? In most cases, high amounts of removal fees come into play when your inventory just isn't selling quickly enough. If inventory sits in Amazon FBA for 6 months or more, you start getting aged inventory surcharges, and the cost of those keeps increasing each month the inventory stays there. Here's the pricing chart for those. If you look closely, you'll see the price per cubic foot increases significantly the longer the inventory sits in Amazon's warehouses. In fact, there's huge jumps after a few months. Keep in mind that you're paying these in addition to the regular storage fees. Amazon has designed these to be ridiculously high because they do not want FBA to be used as long-term storage. They just want inventory to come in, be sold within a few months, and be replaced with new inventory. Once you start getting these surcharges, you're usually deciding between continuing to pay more and more in order to keep the inventory in FBA or removing the inventory altogether. And in some situations, like the example I just talked about, the inventory can't even be sold at all on Amazon for a period of time because there's some kind of restriction by Amazon, and that gives you even less time. If you choose to have inventory returned to you, Amazon charges a removal fee. These fees are charged per unit, and they're based on the size and weight of the product. When you send inventory into Amazon, you're typically shipping it in bulk, often in cases, so the cost per unit to get inventory into Amazon is relatively low. But when inventory is removed, Amazon is effectively charging you to process and ship each unit individually. So even if all your inventory is sitting together in one FBA warehouse, the fees are still calculated per unit. That's why the cost of removing inventory is so much higher than the cost of sending it in. For the example I shared earlier, their cost to ship their tables to Amazon was between $2,000 to $4,000. So you have a brand paying $2,000 to $4,000 to send inventory into Amazon, but then $50,000 to send that same inventory back. For smaller products, the per unit fee might not always be that bad, but as products get larger and heavier, even if they're not even that big, the removal fees do increase quite a bit. And once you start multiplying that across hundreds or thousands of units, the total cost can become really large. There is one trick that can really help in some specific situations. If Amazon's system creates a removal order, like in situations like this one where the inventory got stranded for too long, a removal order will appear in Seller Central automatically, and you may not even realize it right away. You can delay that by going into Seller Central and then the order section and canceling the removal order manually. You can find removal orders by going to View FBA Orders and then click the non-Amazon for whatever country you're looking for. In this case, I used non-Amazon US. Then you would click into the order and cancel it manually with the button on the top right. Now, if you do that, Amazon's system will just generate a new removal order the next day. So you have to go in and cancel it every single day, including weekends, until the issue is resolved. That's not a permanent solution, but it can give you a little bit more time in situations where you're actively working to resolve an issue and you want to delay having that inventory removed. The other option you have is to have Amazon dispose of the inventory instead of returning it to you. However, Amazon charges the same per unit amount whether they send the inventory back to you or they just throw it away. So from a cost perspective, there's no savings from choosing disposal over removal. The only difference is what happens to the inventory. Sometimes brands will have that inventory sent to them and then they can look at it, they can understand what's happening with it. Sometimes they can even resell or repackage it. But there are some trade-offs. If you're having the inventory sent back to you, you obviously need a place to store it. If you're using a 3PL, they may charge you to receive that inventory and process it. So even after paying the removal fee, there's potentially these additional costs. There's also situations where disposal makes more sense, of course. For example, if inventory is expired, damaged, or clearly can't be resold, it may not be worth paying to have it returned and processed. Keep in mind that you will normally have at least a small amount of inventory over time that you'll see in Amazon that's marked as unfulfillable. And usually that's from customer returns. Occasionally a few units will get damaged in the warehouse or things like that, but you have to have that either sent back to you or removed. Many brands, if they're new to Amazon, they'll have that inventory sent back to them at first so that they can look at it, make sure nothing weird's going on, and see if they can resell some of it. But over time, if they really can't resell much of it at all, they'll switch to just having Amazon dispose of that instead. Once they know the process is working, the customer experience is fine. So at this point, the next question is, how do you actually find out what the removal fee or disposal fee is for one of your products? There's a couple ways to do this. The easiest and most common way is inside Seller Central. You go to the Manage All Inventory page and you find your product. You'll usually see a fee preview on the right-hand side. Now that number typically just includes the referral fee and the fulfillment fee. But if you click Calculate Revenue, it will open a detailed breakdown. Inside this panel here, you can scroll down and you'll see additional fees, including the removal fee and disposal fee on a per unit basis. And of course, you'll notice that they're both exactly the same. That gives you a quick way to understand what it would cost to remove that product from Amazon. But what if you haven't started selling a product on Amazon yet, but you want to find out what the removal fee or disposal fees would be? You can use the Amazon Revenue Calculator. You can find this just by searching Amazon Revenue Calculator in Google. You go in and select Define Product and enter the weight and dimensions. Then you scroll down and you'll see the removal and disposal fees per unit. So even before you launch a product, you can understand what those potential costs would look like. Now, if you already have inventory on Amazon that isn't selling quickly enough and you think you might start getting hit with these aged inventory surcharges, there's a way to do some quick analysis. In the FBA inventory page, you can often see what the aged inventory surcharges will be. So at that point, you can compare what will it cost to keep the inventory in FBA and continue paying versus what it'll cost to just have it removed. And this is where you have to make a decision. When I've run the numbers, it usually will make sense to keep the portion of inventory you expect to sell over the next 1 or 2 months in FBA and then remove all the inventory above and beyond that. Of course, ideally you want to avoid getting into that situation in the first place by selling it before it gets to 6 months. For products that are selling consistently, I recommend just keeping around 2 to 4 months of inventory in FBA at a time so that you never have to pay these surcharges. For newer products, it's usually better to be even more conservative, often closer to 1 or 2 months, or even just send in a few dozen units. Remember, you can always send more inventory in a week or 2 later if it starts moving. Amazon's system will sometimes recategorize a product or give you some additional compliance requirements after it's been selling for a couple of months, which is what happened to that Kids Table brand I mentioned earlier. When that happens, they might force you to go through some approvals. So if you're in the type of category that's potentially looked at closely, anything like products used by kids, anything edible, anything that goes on your skin, then you might want to have been selling for a few months before you get comfortable sending in larger batches of inventory. The goal isn't necessarily to avoid these fees entirely because in some cases they're unavoidable, such as inventory that gets returned by customers. The goal is to avoid putting yourself into situations where you have to pay a large amount of removal or disposal fees. If you want to understand the other major Amazon fees, the ones that apply every time a product sells, and the ones that take the highest percentage of your revenue, I have a full breakdown of those as well. You can click right here to watch that video next.